Hi, my name is Andre and welcome to 10,000 Pictures. Nowadays, taking a photo is as easy as pressing a button. One click and the camera does all the rest. Perfectly exposed images every single time. So, why learn how to expose manually if the camera does it all automatically? Well, the answer is simple. When we use the auto mode, we leave all the creative decisions to the camera. So basically, our exposure will always be set to a neutral mode. And that's fine for most situations. But in the long run, it will limit our creativity. And as creative professionals, we need to take control of that process. Defining the exposure is one of the most important creative decisions a photographer should make when taking pictures. The exposure consists in three factors: shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. Every photographer has their own way of working on exposure. A studio professional will probably think about aperture first. As a photojournalist, I always have the shutter speed on my mind first and foremost. So that's where we will start. The shutter is a curtain that prevents light from sensitizing the film or sensor. The adjustment is how fast that curtain opens and closes. The higher the speed, the less light gets in touch with the sensor, and vice versa. The shutter speed also affects how moving objects are seen by the camera. Slower shutter speeds may cause those subjects to appear blurred, while fast shutter speeds have the ability to freeze them. If the light is bright, everything is easier. Fast shutter speeds have the ability to freeze the scene. The shutter stays open for only a fraction of time. It's perfect for capturing action. The faster the shutter speed, the faster the objects that you can freeze. It's common when taking pictures at night or during a party to have the whole image look shaky or blurred. And that happens even when the subject is standing still and posing for us. To avoid this, hold your camera tightly. I usually press my elbows against my chest to give it some extra support. That way, the camera doesn't shake while the shutter speed opens and closes. To summarize, on a sunny day, the shutter speed should be proportionally faster than on a cloudy day. This happens because the amount of available light is much higher on a sunny than on a cloudy one. Consequently, the sensor must be exposed to light for less time. And that leads us to our second factor, the aperture. The diaphragm is a device situated on the lenses that opens and closes according to the camera settings. Instead of defining the amount of exposure time, the diaphragm affects the size of the orifice, or aperture, where the light will travel to get to the sensor. The principle is the same as the shutter. The further open the diaphragm, the greater amount of light that sensitizes the film. Both entities work together and are inversely proportional. So when the shutter speed is high, the aperture should be wider, and vice versa. So a short exposure on a large opening proportionally receives the same amount of light as a long exposure on a small aperture. In practical terms, if you're trying to take a picture on a dark place, try to open your diaphragm. That gives more space for the light to sensitize the sensor, making the picture visible. Using wide open diaphragm also comes with a downside. The aperture interferes with the depth of image's focus and level of detail. Roughly saying, using high apertures is like drawing with a marker. Broader strokes with less detail. If you want a fine point pen level of detail and a focus, try very small apertures. When shooting a portrait, try to use wider apertures. That way you reduce the focus on the background and make your subject pop. Just remember to compensate the wider aperture with a faster shutter speed to maintain the balance. As for now, we have learned that before the picture, the photographer must consider the amount of available light, whether to freeze the subject or not, and how much depth of field is necessary. At the same time, it is important to ponder the downside of every decision. Taking pictures is always a give and take game, where the photographer must state his priorities and make decisions in accordance. But sometimes, we need to have a fast speed on the shutter and a decent amount of depth of field to get the image you want. In those cases, we need to rely on our last factor, the ISO. The ISO defines the film or sensor's sensitivity to the light. So basically, when you choose higher ISO on the camera settings, you actually render it to be more sensitive. This means, in practical terms, that one would need less light to correctly expose an image. On film cameras, the film defines the ISO. This one, for example, is a 403x. So it's a 400 ISO film. If I want to shoot with 100 ISO, I have to change the film. In digital cameras, that switch can be made by pressing a button. Like everything in photography, using high ISOs doesn't come without a price. To make the sensor more sensitive to the light, the image loses some quality. In a nutshell, high ISOs allow photographers to shoot with higher shutter speeds and smaller apertures in darker situations. On the other hand, it causes loss of detail and a noisy look to the image. Nowadays, the ISO technology has evolved so much that it's safe to use a higher ISO without a great loss of image quality. Still, I always try to keep my ISO as low as possible, and I'll use it as a last resort if the other settings are not enough to get the job done. Dominating those three elements is the starting point of becoming a successful photographer. Over time, we'll learn how to manipulate each one of those devices to solve light problems and create different moods for each picture. If you're overwhelmed, don't worry, we'll talk about them individually and how they work together. In the meantime, if you're having difficulties, let me know in the comments. I'll try to help you out. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.